Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good tea and that we practiced some of the things that we were encouraged. Ate some pineapples and watermelons for our physical participants. Our virtual participants, I also hope you managed to get one of your servings of fruit and veg for the day. So quite quickly, we're moving on to our next session. I think in the first few sessions, you've heard us mention nutritional labeling. Nutritional labeling, front of pack, have even seen a sort of side-by-side comparison of what cereal box looked like before and what it did with front of pack labeling guidelines applied. So we want to actually now understand technically what is nutritional labeling and why is it important in terms of promoting healthy diets and preventing NCDs, and then understanding why specifically are we pushing for front of pack labeling. We already know a lot of the products that we consume, especially the processed ones, do have nutrients or ingredients listed at the back, but no, they don't have the plastic bottled water here. But I think we've all seen, for a layman, trying to understand what that label is actually communicating is near impossible. It's like a mathematical equation. It'll be like per 100 gram serving, there's this much sodium, potassium, like using all the technical language that doesn't really tell you whether something is healthy or unhealthy, which at the end of the day is what we need to know. Is it high in unhealthy nutrients, or is it a nutrient-dense food or beverage? So I'll welcome Dr. Hannah Bekele from World Health Organization to take us through a presentation on nutritional labeling as a policy tool and explain the technicalities of the justification for front of pack labeling, after which we'll go into another plenary where all these questions that you have around nutrition labels and processed foods can be channeled. So welcome, Dr. Bekele. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I will take you through this presentation. By the way, that I'm from WHO Afro, overseeing a nutrition program now for the region. So I'm making this presentation as one WHO. We work very closely with the headquarters on this, and we prepare everything together. So this slide is also contributed by Dr. Shizuru and also Dr. Katrin as well. So let me go to the next, let me put it on the slide mode. Okay. So what we would be looking at in the next few minutes would be like understanding the background of nutrition labeling and also appreciate the interconnectivity of WHO and Codex working together in this area. I will also describe a bit on the work of the WHO policy guideline on nutrition labeling, and with general progress of countries implementing nutrition labeling. So the first question that we're asking ourselves is, what is nutrition labeling? So nutrition labeling contains a lot of information. One is the ingredients, which we will be looking at it next. The nutrient declaration and supplementary information that we see on our pre-packaged food, and also the claims, the health and nutrition claims related to the food that we are buying from the market. So first of all, I think we need to understand the background of nutrition labeling as a policy option to promote healthy diet. So this comes from the technical report series 916. Apologies, this is how we used to write, label some of the products previously. So that particular series really served to give a scientific basis for policy action Then this was taken up by development of strategy on diet and physical activity strategy, which was endorsed in 2004. So based on the scientific evidences, the strategy requested Codex Alimentarius Commission to really give a full consideration within its mandate to evidence-based action that might take to improve health standards of foods consistent with the objective of the strategy. The strategy specifically is talking about the public effort to be strengthened by the use of international norms and standards, which is Codex is a very good instrument. So the area that has been described there was labeling, really to allow consumers to be better informed about benefits and contents of foods. I'm glad to hear quite a lot of conversation around consumers, because it's all about consumers. They must understand and be also informed to choose the right food, the healthy food. That's also minimize the impact of marketing on unhealthy diet. If our consumers, we as a consumer are educated on that, then the impact of marketing of unhealthy food will indirectly be addressed. It's also important to provide information about the healthy consumption patterns as well. So WHO continued to work since that time, produced a number of documents that would guide member states in how to apply this policy option. So you can see the different documents, pictures of them. We have all this document which addresses the importance of labeling and how it should be done. So just for your information, Codex has several committees on food and diets, and one of it is the Codex Committee on Nutrition for Foods for Special Dietary Uses. This particular group is looking at a wide range of technical and regulatory issues for foods that contribute for prevention of nutritional deficiencies and diet-related non-communicable diseases. So these are very important group that WHO is working with closely. And also Codex Committee on Food Labeling, which mandated to set standards and guidelines for nutrition information on food packets, and again, to enable consumers to make informed choices. So for us now, we know this is scientifically important to make sure that labeling is correctly labeled in any pre-packaged food, and it shall not be really deceiving. It should not give any erroneous information. It should be in a manner that the Codex is recommending should really put the details of the ingredient and the nutrients that are part of the food. So when we look at it, as you see, you have now the guideline for nutrition labeling. I'm trying to bring this to your attention because sometimes you might ask why nutrition labeling, how is it linked to the food standard, etc. So knowing this document will be helpful. Maybe people from the food standards might probably know Ministry of Health, etc. But for the rest of us also be beneficial to understand this international system which is in place collaboratively with FAO and WHO, guarding the consumer from being provided food items which does not meet the standard. So the food standard is being looked at as a big area because that's where we do not very much know what is going on, but having the standard will help us monitor those food items that are produced for consumption. So generally, this guideline is applying to nutrition labeling of all kinds of food. For foods for special dietary use, I'm talking about prepackaged, and detailed provision is provided. So nutrition labeling consists, according to Codex Alimentarius, has two components: a nutrient declaration and the supplementary nutrition information. So looking at when we say supplementary nutrition information, then there's more information on the nutrition and health claims of that particular product. So this is also well defined, what a nutrition claim means, and a nutrient content claim, how that should be written, etc., and how it should be monitored, even though that is a challenge. So if our country, Kenya, is leading the East Africa, I understand, since most of the food standard developing Kenya also serves other East African countries, if Kenya aligns this to Codex Alimentarius standard, that means a larger proportion of people in East Africa also will be safe. So Kenya has a big responsibility in that, and we would like to make sure that in all aspects, like you said, everyone in the room should really make sure that your effort to bring this into reality. So coming to the list of ingredients, this is a mandatory labeling for prepackaged food. What is it? This is the ingredient which are part of the particular packed food. It's going to be described in any prepackaged food. It's mandatory, as I mentioned. So they list them in descending order as in going weight at the time of manufacturing the food. So these are small in letter and are not readable, but they are there. When it comes to nutrient declaration, so this is about the standardized listing of nutrient content of food or beverage. It's usually positioned either on the back or the side of the package. So I just wanted to show you how this is being labeled in our product. We'll come to the details later. So the nutrient declaration, and then when you look at we've talked about supplementary nutrition information, it's always this information is to increase the understanding of the nutritional value of food and to help assist the interpretation of the nutrient declaration. So it cannot stand by itself, but it helps you to interpret the nutrient declaration. That brings us to the issue of we need to declare the nutrients in our food. So that is very critical. Once we have that, then supplementary information will help the consumer to interpret that. The nutrition health claim also, as mentioned, it refers to any representation, as you see in the picture, and suggests or implies that particular food item has some particular nutritional properties. And that relationship exists between that food and health. So that is called the nutrition health claim. And again, there is a codex standard that countries should be following or the industry should follow based on the National Food Standard Authority in a given country. So coming to promoting labeling, what has been WHO doing so far in promoting healthy diet. WHO also has nutrition guidance expert advisory groups, externals, which are from academia, from different institutions, authorities of the subject matter. They come together and try to put the questions that need to be answered and collect the evidences, evaluate the evidence, and then make recommendations. So one of the subgroup has done this work thoroughly, and now we have the guideline on sugar and potassium and salt. There's a lot going on also that soon we'll have our guidelines out for dietary pattern, PUFA and non-sugar, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then non-sugar sweeteners, carbohydrate, etc. So I want to let you know that there is a lot of work going on to ensure that most of the work that we're doing inform our national strategies and standards at the country level to improve the environment for our healthy diets. So when coming to the nutrition labeling, coming to the codex context, you can see now the nutrient declaration is given in this particular guideline, which is a guideline on nutrition labeling. So it's mandates for us to list the nutrients, as we mentioned, and also the ingredients as well as the nutrients. And the nutrients are described as dietary carbohydrate, fat, saturated fat, sodium, and total sugar. So the work that the WHO has been working was very beneficial in terms of setting the threshold for those nutrients of concern. So in addition, I think all national authorities are advised to decide to express a total amount of sodium and in salt equivalent as salt. And where the level of intake of trans fatty acid is a public health concern, and are countries that advise to consider the declaration of trans fatty acid in the nutrition labeling. More something to understand, because you really want to understand the background of this nutrition labeling, is it's first of all, it's important to know that there are two types of nutrient reference value that we must understand. Because when you see our packages, you see it as a reference value, reference intake, etc. But this is something for all of us to understand. Nutrient reference values, which are abbreviated as NRVR, they refer to the NRV that are based on the level of nutrients associated with a nutrient requirement. That means how much of that nutrient are required on daily basis for an individual to consume. And the other reference value is of interest now. It would be the one which is related to non-communicable diseases. Again, this is based on the level of nutrient associated with the risk of diet-related NCDs. So it is important to know the threshold for this one to set whether whatever is marketed is healthy or not healthy. So this is an important reference value that we'll be using as we are moving forward to set our front of pack labeling. So what are the labels? The intake labels should not exceed, for example, for the saturated fatty acid, 20 grams per day, sodium 2000 milligram. And the intake level to achieve at least potassium intake should be 3500 milligram. I know this is a little bit scientific, but we'll translate that later in an easier way. But this is the background. You would say, where is this threshold coming from? The thresholds are coming from by having put that reference value in place, because those are the studies have contributed showing that if you exceed this threshold, the likelihood that you will be having the risk for non-communicable disease is higher. So the language here is like when we define healthy diet, this is what we are looking at. Anything exceeding that, we'll say this may not be marketed, this is unhealthy, and should be also labeled that way so the consumers can choose. So as I mentioned, I think I'll move on. This is the one thing to understand is the value is based on a reference energy intake of 2000 kilocalories. So this is the amount of energy that an adult will consume. And then the risk that the person will be exposed to if consume a food which exceeds the threshold that are underlined above. So looking now, having all those evidences in place, the nutrition labeling as a policy option has been recommended in various WHO international documents. One of it is the comprehensive implementation plan on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition, which I heard it from the presentation. You made a very good presentation comparing whether Kenya is achieving the nutrition targets. This document, targets set in this document will come to end in 2025. However, similar targets have been already included into SDG. So we'll take them with us until 2030. So also as an outcome of International Conference on Nutrition too, the importance of nutrition labeling, improving healthy diet has already been agreed upon. I'm sure you know most of these documents, but I wanted I want to bring it to your attention as well. The report of the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity back in 2016 also had a number of recommendations, about 12. But one of the first recommendations talking about implement comprehensive program that promoted the intake of a healthy diet to reduce intake of unhealthy foods and sugar sweetened beverages. So how do you know if you don't label the food? That's where it's linked to this one. If we are saying this food needs to be marketed or be consumed as healthy, then we should have a proper labeling, and then the community will be trained to choose the right food. So, and also talks about implementing standardized global nutrient labeling system, and also go for interpretive food front of package labeling. Of course, a lot of support need to be put in place to educate our population. I know Kenya is on track on this one and developing. So we want to commend the country team and the commitment of the government to take this forward. So front of pack labeling. So it's a nutrition labeling system, as I mentioned. It's usually presented on the front of packages. I've talked about the mandatory nutrient declaration and ingredient. Remember, those are non-negotiable. And the first thing to do is that you cannot, I mean, the front of package enables you to understand more about what is the food all about. So that's why we are saying when working with the Kenya group or elsewhere as well, to strengthen the nutrition labeling system first and make sure those that declared as per the Codex Alimentarius. So from there, then we can move on to the simplest way of helping people to interpret what is at the back of the prepacked food. So it comprises and then another concept we all understand is, okay, now we have made put a system that our industries imported, exported, label the food correctly. However, now that's exactly what is in the food. But for us to be able to say this is healthy and not healthy, there's another concept we should understand and apply. That's called a nutrient profile model. The nutrient profile model, it is classifies food into different groups and help you to class by going through that. You set the threshold for that nutrient of concern, and then you collect your foods that have been consumed by the general public and children, and let go through that model so you can identify whether which one is healthy and which one is not healthy. First of all, this is also for the sake of marketing, but also for front of pack labeling. I saw some showing some danger sign that Chile and other countries are using. So that information has to be put plainly in a more understandable manner on the package of the food, so that the educated consumer would choose which one to buy. So this is also Kenya is. On top of this, I think they are almost finalizing the nutrient profile model, which will help us to move forward for front of pack labeling. So I think this is a good example to have in mind. And of course, WHO working in the guiding principle for front of pack labeling as well. If you see in the presentation on the slide, the WHO has been producing this guideline for front of pack, which has been field tested in 2018 and 19. That's what we are trying to use when we advising countries to move forward. So they're very. This is Kenya has passed through this, but just for the sake of the rest of you, the steps. It's necessary to follow several steps while we're doing the front of pack labeling. First of all, we need to understand the contextual need, and we have to do an assessment to see the population dietary pattern and diet-related disease, which I think I've heard a lot of presentation referring to this, and we must understand the legal framework for front of pack labeling, okay? Anything we put in the market needs to be monitored and evaluated, sanctioned if they are not abiding to those standards that the government has put together. So the government must confirm the aim, the scope, and the principles of front of pack labeling system. This has to be well understood ahead of time before we jump on which kind of labeling, which kind of design we're choosing. Informal communication is relevant to stakeholders to understand possible implementation issue as well. And government and led stakeholder engagement is important. And I said government-led because these are the policy issues we want our government to lead those processes, because constitutionally the government is the one who should do such a public good that it promotes health in the given country. So this would probably lead to development of multi-sectoral committee to follow up on this. And then the next level will be selecting the system format that you would like to apply. And there's a lot of discussion here that you should make. And remember, everything should be based on their consumers' understanding, which one they prefer, and what is easy for Kenya. This is very important to be understood. We can make a suggestion in a room, but we must taste it, so that field taste is whether this design is better for Kenyan population. So the principles are also quite a number. Again, I would like to say that Kenya as a team has gone through those things, and they're trying to now culminate all those works together to start rolling the ball. So I believe I might not have the recent development, but I from what I know, they're in good shape. So I will not go into the details of all these principles, but these are the principles we refer to when we sit down around the table and decide how we want to design the system for the country. So the one of the fortunately earlier one, the Codex did not have any guideline on front of pack labeling, but now it's been prompted. The Codex has been prompted to do this, and the work has started. Most of the component of the front of pack labeling from Codex is first looking at what exists and taking into consideration the WHO work and guiding principles that I just showed you, and then start to discuss and design formulate the purpose and the scope, and define also the general principle for front of pack labeling. If Catherine is with me, she will probably have recent information that she can share with us when I finish. So now front of pack labeling as a way of providing supplementary nutrition information is all kinds of the design that we know the major ones have been put in this slide, but we will go through them one by one. So again, why do you want to do a question to you, anybody asking you, why do you want to do front of pack labeling? The answer is just to increase the understanding of the general population on the nutritional value of that particular food. so that they can also interpret the nutrient declaration. Nobody wants to read them, I understand. So now if having this also simplifies, but does not rule out or dismiss the necessity of putting those nutrient declarations. I think I must emphasize on that one, because we can jump them, but that wouldn't be the best way to go. So the first one, as you see, is a interpretive nutrition-based system. It is basically as you see it as a from what you call it, interpretive traffic light colors. And this is to assist, again, consumers to assess the nutrient value of food products. I will show you an example of what other countries are doing. And the black ones are called warning labels. They are nutrient-specific evaluative labels, which are displayed on food when a predetermined threshold of a critical nutrient has been exceeded. For example, in that particular product, sugar, total fat, and salt exceeds, you will see three warning signs. If it's only one, then one. I hope you got me. And the second one, which is the nutrition score, the Nutri-Score. Again, it is a evaluative label that makes use of a scale of 5 different colors with the corresponding letters, as you see, to provide the overall evaluation of the healthfulness of that particular product. So it is a summary indicator of, it may not be as like the warning sign telling you individual nutrients, but this takes into consideration all and grade it, whether that product is healthful or not. Then the endorsement, this is just the health logo, and again, evaluative summary indicator labels that are displayed always on the, when they do it on the product that meet the set of nutrition criteria. It always should be that way, but I'm not sure that all our products that have that endorsement system really meets the set of criteria set. That's why we need always to be very vigilant, because any information should not be deceiving. It should not be a false claim, etc. And the rest are and maybe you would say a lot about this reference intake. These ones, which they list the amount of those nutrients in a particular food, and they give you the percentage with regard to the reference intake, individual reference intake. So it's not very much very attractive, but it's still used in many places. So the rest are hybrid systems. They combine both. They have the star systems, which have the nutrient described and also percentage being given. And also they use a traffic system in addition to tell us whether this is green or amber or red, so that we are be informed. Others are very tough in an interpretive system, and they tell you per serving how much it is. So depending on the level where our population is, our understanding, then these are different choices that we have at hand, to then carefully choose what suits our context. By the way, this work has been started back in the 2004, and then the factories started this front of pack labeling, and now the involvement of government also with the industries to make those labeling more effective, to inform the consumers to choose the healthy diet. And then I think different science afterwards, it's mushrooming all over. You could probably describe another designs as well. But yeah, this is the situation. Now, when I said I'll come to the example of the United Kingdom, for example, for specific country example, United Kingdom actually has this traffic light approach. And then there's also the reference and check with it. And so the hybrid you can see, so they have both systems in place, which they found this be more appropriate for the country. And the Chile thing, as I mentioned, is putting those danger signs. So they first have their limited threshold for solid foods and drinks. So any food that exceeds that, the factories must declare that. So it has. Then you know which one to choose. So that's called the warning sign that we use. And others also use the summary indicator, which described as the stars, and others use the Nutri-Score. And this is a few examples from European countries and Australia using the front of pack labeling. So I think here is the issue now. We should remember always when we are talking about the nutrition labeling, ingredient list and nutrient declaration are critical components. Okay, this is what supports the implementation and monitoring of supplementary nutrition information. So we always say, let us not separate them. Look at them as one, because they are all under nutrition labeling. So this front of pack labeling is to complement the more detailed nutrition declaration, usually provided, as I mentioned, at the back of the food packages. So coming to the need that why do we have to aggressively move this forward? I think this is the justification has been given this morning through the presentation. And also when you look at really how many countries are doing good in promoting healthy diet, we have at least 81% of 160 countries assessed in 2018 to claim that they have a nutrition labeling system in place. So if there's something already in place in the country, now the best thing is to look at what is all the system about and try to align it to the Codex standards. So nutrition labeling, all this, by the way, in the picture that I showed you in the previous slide, most of the countries claim that they're doing it on a voluntary basis, not as a mandatory action. So that lack of not having that mandatory system in place, and not having it legislated, there's always a problem, as you see. Then people will be leading to a variety of nutrient content labels, and sometimes no labels. That's how you see different products in your own country with different types, because the system is voluntary and it is not legislated, so there's no enforcing mechanism in place. So I think this is a big question for all of us, including Kenya. How strong is our system in place? Listing of nutrients included in nutrient declaration is most of the times not in line with what Codex is considered as mandatory. So again, the protection of our people begins by really doing the little things, putting the standard legislated and be mandatory. So people will be careful if we have that kind of system. So the existence of no harmonized nutrient labeling schemes then proliferate here and there, not because of the nutrient labeling itself, but the lack of monitoring is something that leaves it open. Again, if we don't have that, the nutrient declarations legislated, then how do you regulate the health claims? People will come and say this is 100% useful for treating osteoporosis. So you can deceive people by saying that, and industries would probably get a lot of interest in that to get more revenues. But this is what we wanted to highlight. Again, we should not assume our consumers really understand the nutrient declaration, and we should really work with them to see which design or front of pack labeling they are interested in, or understand it, or demand it, so that we do the needful to ensure it reaches at the community level. Yes, most people are also considering the system of front of pack labeling, as I said, because NCD is becoming a public health problem for most countries. Again, how do you want to go about it? You want to do it mandatory or voluntary? Those are the things that need to be decided. You must have always enough epidemiological data, continue to collect the data, identify it at different level. You also want to monitor those things after applying the policy option. Which type of food is of concern now for Kenya, for example? Is it a pre-packaged one or non-packaged? What must we do? So which ones are most consumed? Most consumed products and widely consumed should also be known. That's why we are collecting food types, the packaged food mostly consumed by the population to understand. And then what nutrient would you like to include? So I think it should be based on the codex, and then those nutrients have already been identified as mandatory declaration, and threshold are also given. So then you go to the design and symbols, and know your consumers' perception very well. I heard this presentation, there's someone mentioning that as well. This is critical. Again, remember, we talked probably being one-sided, like maybe the population and the government, but what about the capacity and experience of our food manufacturers, like the small food businesses and formal food sector? We are aware of this as well. Try to assess and build their capacities as well. Lack of capacities in monitoring and compliance, I think I mentioned that. It could be, not having the lab in place, no updated food composition table, which can tell us how much of those nutrients are in a given serving or 100 per 100 gram. So training staff and helping them how to calculate nutrient, etc., is critical. So going forward, I think as we are working on our front of pack labeling and also strengthening our nutrient declaration system as a whole, ensuring alignment through promoting consistency, harmonization is very important. As I mentioned, the work done in Kenya reaches many other countries in East and Central Africa. So let's try to do it in accordance with Codex guideline and standard, and also with other regional bodies. This includes the COMESA and others that we are working with. Strengthen consumer education. It is really a prerequisite for implementing that. Working with mass media, but it needs to be controlled. They should not say what it didn't say. Work with the key opinion leaders. I think this is the purpose of the meeting here, is to bring all of us on board, the NGOs, consumer protection, professional association, government higher bodies, and lawmakers as well. I heard very good input from the representative from the parliament. So this is good. I think we bring everyone together. So we're talking about public health. It is protecting our population, the ones to come and are already living. So we all must be together here. We are not including the factors. They must understand. The industries must understand why this is being done, and they should be really loyal and also comply to all the standards. Coordination among the regulatory bodies is still another important point to consider. compliance and enforcement. I think I've said it. And I believe that the existing system is could be further strengthened to take this forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I have tried to summarize the work since we have been working this with Kenya closely. There might be a lot of addition from the audience, as well as also from our colleague Catherine, if there's anything important she would like to say. With this, from my side, I will stop here, but available for more clarifications in collaboration with my colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bekele. I think we've gotten now an indication of what are recommended information, or what's the recommended information that should be on a nutritional label, what front of pack labeling is and why it's being touted as perhaps, the most effective form of labeling. I think we've also gotten an indication in terms of the process that governments go through to reach the development or implementation of front of pack labeling guidelines, which I think ties to Steve's question as to where Kenya specifically is in terms of developing front of pack labeling guidelines. And I think it was noted that Kenya is developing or has completed developing the nutrient profile model, which is what then informs the front of pack labeling guidelines, and through stakeholder consultation, a country decides for themselves what form or what that front of pack label would look like. So as per the agenda, we were meant to go right into the plenary, but I'd like to give opportunity to Kate Robertson from WHO to speak, to just talk about the high level, the global or international legal and policy framework around front of pack labeling, and the sort of challenges that pushing or advocating for front of pack labeling at a global level, what sort of challenges they're encountering in that. So Kate, please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks, Anna, for that very comprehensive presentation. Look, I'll just share my screen. I'll keep this a fairly brief presentation. I know we're a little pressed for time, but just to share with you, right, great. Can you see my screen there? Okay, that's good. Thanks very much. So look, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Kate Robertson. I'm a lawyer working for WHO headquarters in Geneva in the Public Health Law and Policies team. So specifically, we look more at the kind of legal aspects of certain public health policies, and particularly in relation to prevention of non-communicable diseases. So I'd just like to raise a few points to do with strengthening the legal position of a government through the policy cycle in relation to front of pack labeling. And the reason for that is because you really don't want to start thinking about the legal issues once the law is done, or even worse, once you need to defend the law in the event of a challenge. It's actually really important to start thinking about these things very early in the process, so that you can develop a law or a legal instrument or a standard which is robust, which is effective, and also which is defensible. So there are many things that you can do in order to improve the government's position there. So I'll just run through a few very quick things with a focus perhaps on regulatory objectives, evidence, and also what you can do to mitigate against legal risk. And just starting with this slide here, one very important question, particularly at the very early stage of the process, which is where Kenya is currently up to, is to think about what it is that you want the label to achieve. So on the right there of the slide, you can see a sort of an example of a pathway of effects. So it's important to think about how it is that you want this to work. So, and that then leads into the development of the policy objectives and how you put together or use the evidence that you have in order to support those objectives. So rather than just having as an objective reducing obesity or perhaps reducing NCDs, because these are very long-term objectives and they have a number of different factors that lead into them, and they're not going to be solved by the silver bullet of front-of-pack labeling. It doesn't work that way. So what you really want to do is to think about the steps that it would take to get there. So do you want to encourage reformulation to reduce nutrients of concern? Do you want to change consumer behavior? And how are you going to demonstrate that the policy does that? So that you can, once you've actually got your legal instrument in place, how are you going to assess its effectiveness? Which also then strengthens the measure against any challenges about it being a legitimate or proportionate or effective measure. A couple of things that Hannah has already covered, whether or not the system should be voluntary or mandatory. There are many voluntary systems. For some of these, for example, in the EU, it's because provisions under the regional trade law, so the trade agreements between EU countries, prevent a mandatory system. Whereas in other, for example, Mercosur countries, there is no such restriction, and many of them have implemented mandatory systems. The studies so far tend to suggest that you get better product coverage, better uptake for a wider range of products under a mandatory system. But again, this is a decision to be made by the country. Hannah's mentioned the nutrient profile model, very, very important part of the process of developing a front-of-pack labeling measure. And from a legal perspective, the importance of it is that it gives us scientific and evidence-based justification for applying the label. So it sets you up well for claims in the future by manufacturers suggesting that perhaps their products have been discriminated against, or that the application of labels is arbitrary. So if you actually have an underlying model that clearly establishes the categories of foods that need to carry the label, it puts you in a much stronger position against claims of that sort. Okay, so a really important thing to think about, and particularly at this stage of the process, is supportive evidence. So as Hannah mentioned, it's important that front-of-pack labeling is a government-led policy, so that the development of it and the sort of key decisions about how it's going to move forward are led by government. But also there is a great need for evidence to support that government effort. And that's certainly something which, can be provided through academia, sort of society, to sort of support the government in those efforts. So just looking at the different kind of areas in which evidence is really relevant in developing a robust regulatory measure. As I mentioned, the policy objectives. So gathering evidence of policy support for a front-of-pack labeling system, gathering evidence of the risk or the problem that it's designed to address. So we've already heard from colleagues in the Ministry of Health about the NCD issue and the issues of obesity and the health issues in Kenya. But also it's important to be aware of what the exposure is of consumers to marketing. As Sam has mentioned earlier, there's some work being done on this. But also what consumer understanding is of the labels that are currently in place and what labels are currently in place, both to establish the need for the front-of-pack labeling system that you eventually implement, but also to establish some sort of baseline for what currently is, which you can then use to assess how effective the measure is down the track. And also important to consider what alternatives there are. So for example, it's very important when you implement a front-of-pack labeling system, as Hannah I think mentioned, to also implement a fairly wide-ranging consumer education program so that people understand the labeling system and are responding appropriately to it. But it's also important to have evidence where you can of why just education in itself isn't enough. That it sort of goes back to the idea that somehow it's all about individual choice rather than the food environment, which is an idea which is progressively falling out of favor because it isn't true. But really, to counterclaims that people should make their own choices and you shouldn't control the market, to basically have good evidence of what it is people understand and how they're responding to things is important. And also, as I mentioned, in relation to regulatory distinctions, so where you cover some products with labels and others you don't, important to have evidence to support that. So that's where your nutrient profile model comes in. Just briefly looking at stakeholder engagement, importance of a whole of government approach. And for reasons I'll go into a little more, it's really, really important that from early on, you have government experts who are involved in law and legislative drafting and trade and foreign affairs who are engaged in the process of developing the measure. Because you need to make sure that the measure you put in place is consistent with other domestic laws, that it's properly drafted, because legislative drafting is in itself a very specific skill, and also that it's consistent with your obligations, or with Kenya's obligations as a country under its trade and investment treaty commitments. Public consultation, also very important. That's come up in a number of ways, both as an opportunity and also because often it's a due process requirement that the public are consulted or that stakeholders are consulted. So in order to make the measure robust, you need to make sure that's complied with. And then where it is involved, where there is industry consultation involved, to make sure that you've considered and have sort of procedures in place to manage potential conflicts of interest. Going back to a question that was raised earlier, I think by Simon, about what sort of opposition you might expect. I know the question was in relation to marketing restrictions, but this is actually drawing from the World Cancer Research Fund, sort of global research on non-legal challenges to nutrition labelling. And they sort of group them into these 4 categories. So what has often happened where countries implement labelling systems that impact on, say, producers or retailers of foods that are high in fats and sodium and sugars, is that you get this sort of response pushing back against the measure. So looking to try and delay it, looking to try and divide the people who are trying to push it through by suggesting alternative labels and models, or a voluntary rather than a mandatory system, or using lobbying to try and actually weaken the measure, to deflect, so basically trying to scare people essentially, or to try and claim that there are easier and better ways to do it, or that it's going to have an economic impact, which generally speaking has not been shown to be the case, or just to deny that it's necessary. Okay, so just looking really quickly at legal challenges, there are a number of ways in which legal challenges could be brought. So under domestic law, regional or international trade law, or also under international investment agreements. Now, it's really important to note that legal challenges haven't really materialized much to date in front of pack labelling. There have been some disputes under regional trade agreements, for example, in the EU. They haven't gone to a sort of full-blown piece of litigation. It's really more investigation at this stage. So at this stage, it's really much more of a threat that is made against countries to sort of scare them into not implementing front-of-pack labelling, rather than there being a body of law where challenges have been made successfully. Important to note that Chilean marketing restrictions were challenged. If you think back to the Zucaritas example from Chile, which had a picture of a cartoon tiger on the box, which was removed under the marketing restrictions regime, that was the issue at stake there. So it concerned basically the ability to use trademarks as property rights. It wasn't, in that sense, terribly clearly related to front-of-pack labelling. Okay, so if challenges are to be anticipated, and bearing in mind they haven't materialized yet, there are important lessons you can learn from tobacco control. So where you would probably expect to see the challenges come, because the big global players tend to play from the same playbook, whether they're tobacco or big food, or the tactics to date have been reasonably similar, is that where you would see challenges would be, for example, for failure to follow a procedural process. So, for example, if there's a requirement to hold a public consultation and you don't, or if there are committees that a piece of legislation should go through and it doesn't, then that's a ground for challenge. So it's really just a matter of making sure that all the procedures are actually followed. And that actually applies at a regional level and an international level as well. So with, say, the TB2 committee at WTO, or with the committees at the EAC level, there are notification requirements. So it's important that those are followed. And again, important that you're engaging with experts in trade and, trade and foreign affairs who can advise you about those processes. The other thing are rights-based challenges. So when you have corporations claiming that their human rights have been breached, for example, protection of property rights, freedom of expression, freedom to run a business. So because under, say, the Kenyan constitution, there are some very strong rights for the individual in favour of, well, fundamental rights to the highest attainable standard of health, fundamental rights to food. There are also fundamental rights to freedom of expression and property. So it's important to make sure that there's a clear balance that's undertaken between those in order to put yourself in a good position against these sorts of challenges. In terms of case law, I'm sure many people in the room will be quite familiar with the British American tobacco case against Kenya, which dragged on for quite some time and interfered with the legislative process. So that there are lessons to be learned from that. So make sure you've got your lawyers in the room when you're considering policy design. Okay, so just in summary, just what you can do to mitigate legal risk. The first thing is to remember that governments really do retain a very broad discretion to regulate in the interests of public health. So it's a sovereign right, it's a right that's recognised under trade and investment agreements. And so it's certainly something the government has every right to exercise. The important thing is to make sure that the measures are legitimate, so that they have a legitimate public health objective, that they're proportionate to the risk that they're designed to address, and that they're based on evidence. So there's a few mitigation measures listed here, which basically I've already covered. But yeah, just as a bit of a reminder that these are the things you need to do to guard yourself against the challenge, and put yourself in the best position against the challenge. So just to finish then, important point, legal challenges against front of pack labelling have not really materialised. So it's more of a threat than a fact at the moment. So it is important to be aware of regional trade obligations. Think about the lessons from tobacco control, think about your policy objectives, and think about your evidence and who you have in the room in designing the policy. So look, I'll stop there. But thanks to everyone for your attention, and I'm certainly here on the line for any questions and in the chat box if people have any. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Dr. Hannah, for that presentation. So I think at this point, colleagues joining us virtually and also colleagues joining us physically here in the room, you've basically heard what nutrition labeling is all about, why it's important, and I think I do like the emphasis around that all this is being done to ensure that there's better information going out to consumers, and also just picking from Kate's presentation around the legal process on these. So at this point, I do want to open it up for questions, both to for colleagues who are here. You can just raise up your hand. For colleagues joining us virtually, you can type in the chat box, and you can also raise your hand, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you have around this topic. So maybe just by a show of hands, any questions from colleagues in the room? Or any comments? So I can see one. Colleagues joining virtually? So I think we can start with you, Steve. You can ask the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presenters. Mine is a question and a comment. So from the presentation, I've seen something like the guideline was revised in 2013. So I'm looking at, there are many years that have gone by. Do we have a review, or that is the only guideline that we are using? That's number one. Number two, these can also come as a country level. I've seen what WHO have done. They've developed things like, I've seen the advisory expert committees. So I'm just wondering, in Kenya, and I know we have people from the Ministry of Health, do we have those committees that assist in terms of regulating and monitoring the products that are in the market? Because one of the presenters said that all products that are in the market, they should be monitored. So do we have a structured way of monitoring the products that are in our market? And if they are there, do we have civil society representations in those committees? Because I think regulations, we being civil society, our main work is to support and provide oversight. So if we have if we don't have a space for civil society, then I think it's high time we get a representative from civil society sitting in those key committees. Finally, I think there was a component of consumers should be the ones that are advising on how this labeling happened in terms of the positioning of these labels in terms of the food that is in the market. So do we have a space or an example or an experience from maybe different people in different countries, maybe if they have an experience whereby they have a successful consumer engagement or dialogue where the consumers were able to give direction on how they want a product to be labeled and it is in the market now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I think you do raise some important questions around maybe updating of the guidance that is there, around civil society involvement, and around consumer advisory. I think something that I picked from when Dr. Hannah was sharing. I also picked an important bit around how the labeling is done, that is the labeling done in the proper way, and once those labels are put out, how are consumers able to interpret that information? And I think that is where the push for front of the pack labeling comes, that we do have back of the pack labels, we do have the nutrient declarations that are put, the nutrient claim that is put there, but what additional label needs to be put in place to ensure that consumers can easily know the nutrients and the ingredients of the product that they are consuming, and of course, as a measure to promote a healthy diet. So thank you. We can pick maybe any other question before we hand it back to facilitators. So I can see, yes, you can proceed, please.
Yes, my name is Charles. I work for GAIN. I was just looking at the legal processes, and of course, bearing in mind that a lot of the foods that are in the market, which sometimes actually considered unhealthy, from the companies who are also major contributors in terms of the GDPs of countries such as the one that we live in. But I'm just trying to ask, how do we then balance that kind of conversations in terms of making it possible for the government to be able to regulate those kind of processes, especially including promotion or advertising what sometimes is considered unhealthy vis-a-vis the kind of contribution in terms of taxes and all that. And then I think that's where sometimes it becomes a bit delicate, where we get that kind of support that we have, especially from the business community, without necessarily looking at it as though you're stifling their businesses and all that. And of course, with the tax, vis-a-vis the tax that they generate and all that.
Thank you, Charles. I think, maybe, Dr. Morris, please.
Thank you for those two presentations. I think mine is, we're talking about law, policies, and so on. Sometimes, quite often, some of these issues will find themselves before a court, for example. So what I'd like to know from the WHO's point of view, in those countries where some of these standards, regulations, and whatnot have been implemented, what sort of engagements have they had with other players, for example, in the judicial system, the judiciary, and also, for example, the members of the bar, the legal profession? What sort of engagements have they had with those kinds of partners or stakeholders?
Thank you. So, question around, I can see your question at the back.
Good afternoon. My name is Rahab Mwaneki. I work at KANCO, Kenya Youth NGOs Consortium. Having listened to the whole conversation since morning, I think my challenge right now, and I want to refer to the Tobacco Act, and because tobacco was also presented here in the morning, and one of the challenge we are having is where, if you look even at the packaging, because we're talking of labeling should be clear. The fact that manufacturers want to put small prints on products is some of the things we need to be advocating against. Two is the fact that the government of Kenya, and there's been a lot of consultation, we as an institution are following up, the issue of taxation. When you talk of nicotine products, you know, even electric cigars also contain nicotine. But now the manufacturers come around to circumvent the process and say that this is not nicotine because they want lower taxes for the products. So what I'm trying to say is, as much as you want to advocate for change in labeling, for change in taxations, the private sector, which is more interested in profits, have a lot of money to campaign against you. But again, as a civil society, we need to raise our voice and say if it's nicotine product, it needs to be. In fact, some of those products have been banned in US, in Indonesia, but we have them in our country. Why we have those products in our country, yet some WHO has gone against them, is something we need to be discussing about. And again, labeling. We need to go to the WHO standards and just tell the Ministry of Health, we need labeling as stipulated by WHO. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahab. I think an important point to put there that, yeah, of course, we are having a lot of maybe from industry, a lot of the information that is provided not being very clear in small print and all that, but you are making a strong case that these ought to be clearly indicated for consumers to be able to know if there's something being introduced in another way, that this is clearly indicated. So thank you, Rahab, and I don't know if we have any other colleague from, so yes, I can see a comment from Celine, who is joining us virtually, saying, yeah, agreeing with Rahab, saying those are good remarks. The government is currently working on revising the current pictorial health warnings that would be more effective. So, yeah, thanks, Celine. So I don't know whether we have any colleague. Okay, yes, please.
Thank you. I think
maybe you can just introduce yourself again for the sake of.
Oh, I introduce myself again. Yeah, no problem. My name is Anne Swakei from NCD Alliance Kenya. My question, I don't know whether it is really a question or comment, but it will culminate into a question. So far, the policies that we need as a country are in place, and this conversation has been there. We continue to talk about front of pack labeling and all that, and talk about the risk factors that end up to bring NCDs to populations and basically to us. So if the policies are there and the conversation is there, how do we then follow up, or how do we make sure then this conversation is just not on the, in conference halls? It trickles down to the person at the community level, or it gets to the person that needs to hear this conversation, like the consumer. Because yes, the more we talk about it, I realize every other time you're going to the supermarket or you're just walking around and you realize every other thing is so unhealthy, from the foods, from even now trickling down to the community, like to the estates, even anywhere, you just find very unhealthy foods and all that. And also the introduction of, like, even if I can talk about even the drugs, so many types, and even put even in sweets and even in something called ngumu. You find that they have even put the KDF thing, yeah, that KDF thing. They even put drugs into that. So apart from, yes, we have good policies as a country, But how are we making sure then those policies are not just on books or on papers, but they are being implemented? Are we following up to make sure that they're being implemented, or we're just having this conversation day in, day out without actually having to measure what has been done in the, down there where we are targeting? So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think very powerful point there around consumer information, holding the government to accountable on implementation of the existing policies and the law. So yeah, I think we'll have a response from that. So at the back, please. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. My name is Esther Maynard from Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. Mine was, if we are creating awareness on this, on labeling as a policy to promote healthy diets. And then the question is, once we create awareness on this policy, are we going to have an action plan and an act to ensure that actually what we are saying, we give the policy direction, but there is an act to enforce, because the consumers are really suffering. If you look even at the water we are drinking now, you look at the nutritional information. If you have an eyesight problem like me, you may not even understand what is there. So mine was just on those two issues, action plan and an act.
Okay, thank you. I think, yeah, important having how do we implement and how do we put this one into binding law, that maybe at the policy level that could not be enough. How can this go into law? So thank you for those questions and comments. So just also trying to monitor colleagues who are joining us virtually. If you have any question or comment, you can post on the chat box, or if you like to speak, you can also just raise your hand and you can respond. But at this point, as I'm monitoring that, I can just give, I see Steve's hand is up. So maybe Steve, 1 minute, and then I can hand it back to the facilitators just to respond to some of the questions.
Timothy, it's not a question. I think we have somebody from KEBS in this meeting. And I think KEBS plays a big role in terms of regulations and so on. I think the person from KEBS can give us maybe an insight, because every labeling, I think it passes through the KEBS department, if I'm not wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for that suggestion. I think we can have that. And you want to respond? So maybe... Okay, so we have, maybe this is how we can go about it. So there were some questions directed towards the government. So we have Immaculate and my colleague there who will respond to that, and then we'll hand it back to Kate and Dr. Bekele to address some of the other questions or comments that were raised. So we can start with, please proceed, and then Immaculate.
Good afternoon. I think I didn't get your name right. I just want to give a few, Steve, sorry for that. There are a few responses which, if you listened keenly concerning what Edgar was presenting, a few answers have been brought in. One of the key things that has also come out is if you look at how the legal consideration of front of pack labeling, you realize something that has been mentioned, which is quite clear in the policy design, and they have said whether it is voluntary or mandatory. I think the government, through the Ministry of Health, deserves a pat on the back, because after this, the systems will be engaged. And if you listen keenly on Edgar's response to one of the questions, he said, we need to know how advocacy to which individuals and to which particular systems. And if you can be keen, you realize if you follow Edgar and the team in the Sun, they have been involving our lawmakers a lot. That is a candid response that we need to work with. Another thing that comes out of the questions, which I'm feeling that we can have solution, is that some of these nutrition or health claims, if they are not placed out in the media with evidence, then it is very hard to regulate them. So as if we work with the regulation, if we work with evidence, if we have a policy brief that has been presented to us, I think actions and steps are then candid to be taken. Thank you so much.
We can have Immaculate maybe, and then I'll respond. So Immaculate, back to you, please.
First, I request to see Mohammed. Let us all stand. Being healthy is not only about eating. It's about keeping yourself active. I'm going to talk while everyone is standing. No, not for your record now. I'm going to talk while everyone is standing, including Rahab. Rahab, you're standing. Okay, thank you so much. You are all going to stand until I stop. I have quite a number of comments that I want to make, and I have my colleague here. I don't know whether you will talk some related issues. Wow, the first comment or question was on, is there an advisory committee to monitor the products? Do we have structured way of monitoring these products that are currently in the market? The answer is yes. And if we are not aware of that, and we are here, how about the mama mboga, the ones who are at home? If we are the ones who are asking such questions, then we need to read ahead, and we need to actually learn a lot. The Kenyan government works with Kenya Bureau of Standards. This is a regulator, and they are the ones who authorizes before you manufacture any commodity in Kenya. You start your test, and you present your products, including your results, to KEBS, who go through all their processes, which I may not be privy to. Then they are the ones who approve that your product is okay, can be placed in the market. They are the ones mandated to still go and pick those products at random, on regular basis. They don't tell anyone that they are going to this store, and that is why you sometimes hear that this flour or this product was removed from the shelf because of one reason. There was a mistake they found. So I would say that monitoring system is there. KEBS picks those products to go and test themselves. They have their scientists within their system. They test and they give results. If they find that the result is not according to the expected standards, then they call the manufacturer, and all those things are removed from the market. Second, you are still standing. You can make steps so that you don't fall. Experiences from other countries. Yes. Before Kenya started thought processes of front of pack labeling, I would tell you it started way back 2019. It is not now. It started way back 2019. And we have read a lot. We have shared experiences from other countries. We have been advised technically. WHO, the same ladies from WHO headquarters actually came to the country to come and do a baseline in the country to find out what is the status of Kenya. Are they ready to have front of pack labeling? They analyzed the data, they disseminated the data, they told us where we are, and that is why investment has been put in and the processes have been initiated. We have started, and the train has left the station. It is ongoing. So we have experiences. I would mention the countries. One of them is South Africa, Zambia, Malawi. Help me. Including the Australia, the Chile. You remember in the morning they were mentioned, but
I just mentioned the African countries because we are using the WHO recommended document, which is African region. So we use a lot of the analysis that was done. When WHO was developing those documents, they actually came into African, including Kenya, to find out what is happening, what is your status, how can we go about it. So we have all the reports that are available. Penalties on unhealthy foods, I would just like to, it was a comment, and we don't want to say that penalties. I know you have how you call your punitive measures, but what we are advocating for, and this is the civil society to advocate on behalf of the government, how can we have healthy products costing cheaper than unhealthy so that we discourage the population? That is my wish. How do you help us so that healthy products should be able to be costing less? And you know, currently it is opposite. Unhealthy costs less than the healthy. You go to the market looking for managu, you will find that managu is so expensive, while cabbage is so cheap. Or a bottle of soda is so cheap. Since we were born, bottles of sodas are not increasing in prices. In fact, they reduce. They reduce. So I don't know how they are making this, how they are making their business thrive, but it's very important that we talk about how can we advocate within our country such that the healthy products should be costing less. We have Department of Agriculture with us because it's about the access. If I access more of the healthy products, then it means that the price can be reduced. And how can I access? Productivity has been increased, so availability of those healthy products are in the country. Finally, last but not least, engagement with legal profession. I will not comment about that. How does information reaches the community who are implementing what recommendations that we come up with here? And that takes me back to my first comment. Really, if we are sitting here in Pan-Africa and we don't know, then how do we expect the person in my village to get to know? The civil society are known to be talking louder than the rest. So can we hear your voice? Can we hear your voice? Finally, before you sit down, an act to enforce front of pack or action plan, or I would like to say this, that, and this is government process or thought process, or what is supposed to happen. We have started development of front of pack labeling standards. We have started, we are not yet there. But according to what is expected, once it's developed, we want to make it a bit voluntary, because that is the process of KEBS. When there's new development, they make it voluntary. While they wait for the government to develop those policies or act or whatever that the government is developing, they give government 3 years to do it. If government does not do it, KEBS has mandate of shelving it and removing it completely and everybody free for all. But if the government puts the house in order, then develops those acts or whatever it is that the government wants to develop to make it mandatory. After that 3 years, they can give a grace period of 2 years. That makes it 5 years. Once 5 years has elapsed, it is shelved and the process shall start again if the government wants. But now I talk on behalf of government because I'm the team lead for this process. For now, it will be voluntary. Whatever information we shall put is an additional information on what is going on now. We have backpack labeling. So whatever is going on now shall continue. We shall add additional information where everyone will be able to read and get informed. So in other words, we are giving supplementary information. We are hoping that someday it will be mandatory. Thank you so much. Now you can gain your seats.
Okay. Okay. We just want to give an opportunity to Kate and Hannah, or to also respond to some of the questions before maybe they drop off the call for other engagements. But I think thank you, Immaculate, for sharing around that, the importance of having supplementary information. And I think also us being in this forum, I think we are happy, and I think colleagues can also just have a conversation with you on some of the committees that exist. How can they, for instance, participate or contribute to that? So I think knowing who is mandated for what. But I think from morning the conversation has been strong around that. There's strong evidence. The health-related NCDs are on the rise. There's strong evidence, I think, coming also from this room that there's very consumers. One of the big factors for consumers, for instance, making healthy choices, it's around also an issue of information, which has been presented how, and now you've also talked about implementing a voluntary or developing a voluntary front of the pack labeling. So, but I think that's a conversation that we can continue having as we move to the afternoon session, whereby we'll look at the existing law, the existing policies, and we can also weigh in on what we think needs to happen, or what needs to happen. So, Kate, to you. You can respond to some of the responses or questions that were shared.
I had to write a question before the response.
Just a moment. Kate, you can proceed, and then we'll come back to the room. Kate, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Look, I'll just respond really quickly to a couple of the questions and then hand over to other colleagues. And thanks to Immaculate for actually covering a lot of the questions. I think first, in relation to the question of whether external lawyers were consulted or members of judiciary in other countries, I guess as a first point, it is a decision for the government who they choose to consult. And I think that whether you just look to your government lawyers as to how laws are interpreted in the courts, or whether you ask the judiciary directly, question for government. And to be honest, I'm not really sure in other countries which path has been taken there. I know in some places they have consulted with legal academics for various reasons. So there is some precedent for that. But again, it comes back to a government decision about how they would like to be advised and by who. Similarly, there have been a number of questions around action plans and what's next and that sort of thing, which is great because it's clear that there's good support or desire to support the government in this policy area. What I would say with that, and I would defer to colleagues from KEBS and Ministry of Health, that at the very early stages of developing a policy, there are, and I know this is the case in KEBS, there are actually sort of statutory processes that need to be followed, which define who is consulted, and that includes a number of stakeholders from a range of different areas, including civil society, including the government ministries. But generally speaking, it's not until slightly later in the process when the policy at least is a little more developed in its outline or in its aims, that there is a more public kind of disclosure. So I would just say that it's possibly a little early in the day in Kenya for action plans and for broader consultation. From what I understand, these things are certainly underway, but they're just very early on at this stage. But the desire to support government is clear, and I think that's a really great thing. Look, I'll stop there and just hand over perhaps to colleagues. Just wondering if Hannah or Chabi or Katrin, who are on the line, have
And thank you very much, Kate. I don't have much to say. Just a little example with regard to the role of consumers in front of pack labeling. South Africa, once they wanted to understand what kind of design for front of pack labeling and how simplified it should be for consumers, this study was conducted, and the consumers were happy to be involved, and I think they identified that they don't want very complicated symbol or any design, but very simple one which they can enable them to pick and run with it. So, and then remember this implementation of such options, policy option to improve healthy diet is just starting in our country, in our continent. So we may not have a lot of things to say now, but we are using the evidences from the other countries also by working at least being a networker to those countries, and also through WHO guidelines and evidences, which looks at all those things into consideration. I would like to call upon Katrin to address the other questions and complement as well. Over to you, Katrin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Yeah, it was fascinating to listen, and really congratulations to everyone on advancing the topic of regulating for healthy diets. I don't want to take a lot of time realizing that you probably have a lot of internal discussions you want to have. But one of the comments I wanted to address, I think it was by a colleague from GAIN, who maybe I misunderstood, but who seemed to be questioning a bit the importance of regulating for healthy diets, being concerned about possibly the loss of productivity or maybe a rise in unemployment if these industries are regulated. I think it's really important to realize that learning from history, for example, in the area of food and nutrition, industry has to be regulated. If industry weren't regulated, our food wouldn't be as safe. We'd have heaps of foodborne illnesses circulating. Companies have the primary interest to sell their products, and health is a secondary interest, if at all. So it's really important for the Ministry of Health to ensure that they utilize their duty to ensure that the health of the people is protected. So I think regulations like marketing of unhealthy foods to children specifically, taxing unhealthy products, or labeling, including front of pack labeling, are really important policy measures to ensure that the people of Kenya actually can make use of their right to healthy and nutritious foods, because we all know that the profit margins are highest for SSBs and unhealthy foods. So it's the easiest to produce those foods because it brings in a lot of gains. One of the comments I saw in the chat was in relation to the fiscal measures, and it's true, there are taxes on SSBs, on sugar-sweetened beverages, but I think the second part of that comment, taxes on trans fatty acid, maybe the person who commented meant taxation on unhealthy foods in general, because the evidence on taxing just a nutrient isn't very strong. So if there is thinking about advancing fiscal policies to promote healthy diets, then it would be better to think in terms of food categories rather than just taxing a singled out nutrient, because that would be very complicated in terms of the tax administration. So congratulations again on this really important sensitization workshop, and good luck in all the future endeavors in advancing these policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you, Dr. Bekele. Thank you, Kate, for those. And I think I do like some important points you've made around that. That here, true, industries have to be regulated. If left, the main driving point around their working is profit, and so we cannot just sit back and leave that. And especially at this point when there's strong evidence that we actually need to, for consumers we need healthy products if we are to prevent the rising burden of NCDs. And I do like also the comment that was made around consumer information that, with consumer designing the processes, it has to be a simple design. What can be understood by everybody, both urban, rural, in whichever area. Like, it does not. We need also to understand that we are looking at, for instance, issues around that it's a design that can easily be picked up by colleagues, for instance, with low literacy level or those with high literacy level, so that it's standard. There's equity. There's for everybody to understand what the sign means, what the nutrients are, and if I consume this product, what this actually means for me. And I think that is also an important factor in defeating some of the nutrients claims that are made, or nutrition claims that are made, which are misleading to the public. And I think my colleague Lisa talked about the issue of the misconception. I think the experience with Royco and all that in the morning. So before we break for lunch, I think I'll just quickly read the comments that have been made on the chat box, so that colleagues in the room can also just hear this. So from Hannah Kiarie, the discussions are rich and informative. Front of pack labeling, if and when adopted in Kenya, will help consumers make informed decisions before purchase of manufactured products. Children need to be sensitized from a young age on importance of consuming healthy products and avoiding junk products. So thank you, Hannah, I think from the Ministry of Industrialization. So Celine also noted that one way to discourage consumption of unhealthy products and encourage consumption of healthy products is through application of price and tax measures. For instance, identifying components of processed food products that can be taxed higher, which will make them more expensive, hence their demand is reduced. Some measures that have worked include the taxation of sugar, sweetened beverages, and trans fatty acids. I think an issue that also Immaculate had mentioned, why some products, their prices are not increasing, that the unhealthy products are lower in price and easily accessible than the ones that, for instance, will be considered healthier. So Celine also noted that, unfortunately, industry interference industry interference and might is a real challenge in Kenya, playing against tobacco control interventions, including taxation and application of graphic health warnings on tobacco products. So just sharing the experience around how they went about regulating the tobacco sectors up to the extent that warning signs were put in the packs. I think right now with cigarettes and all that, the warning signs are there so that for people who are using the products to be able to make an informed choice. So we are 20 minutes past the session, and I think at this point I like to thank all of you who've joined us virtually and those of you who are physically here for the morning session. So we will break for lunch. And when we are back in the afternoon, we will now go into a little bit of the legal conversation to be able to know what are the current laws in Kenya, what are the current policies that we do have, and then when we talk about a human rights-based approach to prevention of NCDs, what are we talking about, and how can we use all this information we are getting here to continue our advocacy for those in civil society, for those in government? How can we use the information in policy making, and for those in the in law in Parliament, how can they use this information in lawmaking processes. So thank you very much. We can break for lunch. We're breaking at 1:20, so we take 1 hour. We'll be back at 2:20 for the afternoon session. Thank you very much, and we can break for lunch.